What would you do if you had to choose between your career and helping a stranger in need? Jason Carter faced this life-changing decision, and it cost him everything. Fired for making the wrong choice, could a simple act of kindness lead to something greater? What if it could change his life forever? Join us to discover how one man's selfless act leads to a second chance. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Jason Carter had worked at Elite Freight Solutions for 12 long years. He was used to the grind, waking up early, driving through the crowded streets of Chicago, working in the vast, cold warehouses, lifting boxes, managing deliveries, and doing everything it took to keep things running smoothly. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was his. It was a job he took pride in, one he could count on to pay the bills and support his mother, who had been battling illness for years. But even though he had been dedicated, consistent, and always showed up, something always seemed to stand in his way when it came to promotions. Jason wasn't blind to the system at Elite Freight Solutions. He knew the company favored younger workers, or those with more connections. He was a black man in a company where people who looked like him rarely made it to the top. And despite working harder than most, despite going above and beyond, he found himself passed over time and time again for promotions. The new hires, many with less experience, always seemed to get the nod. But Jason had learned how to swallow that bitterness. He worked through it, kept his head down, and kept showing up. He didn't have time for resentment. What mattered to him was proving that he was worthy of the role, no matter what anyone else thought. But today was different. Jason could feel it in his bones, the kind of day where something was finally going to break for him. He had been waiting for this moment for over a decade. Today was the day he had a real chance at a promotion. Warehouse supervisor. The title he had worked for, dreamed of, and pushed through endless tough days to earn. It was everything. The raise, the respect, the chance to move beyond the constant lifting and sorting, to sit in the office and make decisions that mattered. It wasn't just a title. It was the kind of position that could finally secure his future. It was the kind of job that could give him the stability he so desperately needed, especially with his mother's medical bills piling up. He could finally stop working 12-hour shifts in the freezing cold winters and the unbearable heat of the summer, dragging himself home exhausted every day. His mom, always supportive but always worried, had been dealing with her own health struggles. Jason knew he had to make it work for her sake. That morning, as he woke up before dawn and got ready, there was an extra bounce in his step. The adrenaline coursed through him even before he had his first cup of coffee. He ironed his uniform with care, making sure the blue fabric was crisp and neat. It wasn't much, just a navy blue shirt and khaki pants, but it was part of the uniform he had worn for years, and today he was going to wear it like he belonged in that office with the higher-ups. Today was his day to prove that he had earned his spot in the room, a room where he'd never been invited before. He spent the morning double-checking everything. His clipboard was ready, his notes prepared, and all he had to do now was show up. The executives were coming to the warehouse for the interview, to meet with the people they'd considered for the position. Jason had no doubt that this was the moment he had been waiting for. All he had to do was show up on time, speak confidently, and let them see how much he knew, how much he cared, and how much he was willing to work for it. There was no way this was going to slip away from him. Not today. But as he stood at the loading dock, waiting for the trucks to pull in and trying to calm his nerves, something happened that would change everything. Jason had just checked the inventory and was making sure the schedule for the day was set. The rain had started to come down, light at first but gradually getting heavier. He could hear the rhythmic patter against the metal roof above him, blending with the distant hum of trucks idling, their engines rumbling in the background. It wasn't the ideal weather for a big day like this, but Jason tried not to let it bother him. The rain had been a familiar sound over the years, just another part of the job. He turned, checking his watch, making sure he still had time to head upstairs and meet with the corporate executives. The clock was ticking, and he couldn't afford to be late. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something that immediately took his focus away from his meeting. An elderly woman, drenched in the rain, was slowly making her way toward the customer pickup counter. Her steps were shaky and she looked fragile, like she might collapse at any moment. Her thin gray coat was soaked through, and her frail frame trembled from the cold. She was clutching a receipt in her hands, scanning the area, clearly in search of assistance. Jason's first instinct was to keep walking, to stay on task, to get upstairs for the meeting. It was important. His promotion depended on it. But then, the sound of a gust of wind rattled through the open dock doors, knocking a wet floor sign onto its side, and the woman's feet slipped out from under her. Her body hit the floor with a sickening thud, and she cried out in pain. In that moment, everything inside Jason stopped. His heart raced and a cold chill ran through his body. He froze. His gaze locked onto the woman who was now lying helplessly on the ground, her face twisted in pain. She looked up at him, and her eyes were wide, pleading for help. He could feel the weight of the moment, the kind of moment where you have to make a choice. Jason's mind raced. The meeting, the promotion, his shot at a better life. He knew he was moments away from walking into that meeting that could change everything for him. But then there was the woman. She was lying there in pain, shivering in the cold rain. He couldn't just leave her. He couldn't ignore it, no matter how much he needed to be in that meeting. Not when someone needed him. He turned, glancing at the warehouse clock, 9:45 a.m. He had 15 minutes, maybe less. Every part of him screamed that he should hurry, that he should make a run for the conference room and not look back. But in his gut, Jason knew what he had to do. He wasn't going to leave her there. As he walked toward her, the cold rain began to pour harder. The sound of the storm outside grew louder, but everything inside Jason grew quieter. He knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he gently asked if she was okay. The woman barely had the strength to speak, her voice barely audible over the rain, but she whispered that she thought she had hurt her hip. Jason didn't hesitate. He pulled off his jacket, draped it over her shoulders to shield her from the rain, and called for help. He dialed 911, his fingers fumbling from the rain and the panic that had set in. As he spoke to the dispatcher, his heart sank. He knew the meeting was slipping further away. He was running out of time, but he also knew he couldn't leave. Not now, not when she needed him. Jason Carter had spent the last 12 years pouring his heart and soul into his work at Elite Freight Solutions. Each morning he woke up early, braved the harsh elements of Chicago weather, and worked tirelessly to prove his worth. But despite all the hard work, despite the hours of sweat and effort, he had always been overlooked for promotions. Today, however, was supposed to be different. Today was the day he had finally earned his shot at the warehouse supervisor position, the promotion that would change everything for him. It wasn't just about the job itself, it was the opportunity for a better life. But in the blink of an eye, everything fell apart. After helping the elderly woman, Jason stood there, his heart still racing. He had done the right thing. He had stayed with her, called for help, and made sure she was safe. He couldn't ignore a person in need, not even if it meant losing his shot at the promotion. As the paramedics took her away, Jason checked his watch. It was already 10:15 a.m. The meeting had long passed. The reality of his situation hit him hard. The promotion he had waited 12 years for was now out of reach. Jason walked back toward the office, his boots heavy against the wet pavement. His stomach twisted in knots as he wondered how the executives would react to his absence. He had promised to be there. He had promised to show them he was ready for the role, but he had chosen to help someone instead. There was no turning back now. As he entered the executive office, he was greeted by the cold stares of the corporate leaders. Jason's heart sank as Mr. Callahan, the warehouse supervisor, looked him up and down with a mix of disappointment and frustration. Jason stood there, his mind racing but his body frozen in place. He knew what was coming. "Jason," Mr. Callahan began, his voice sharp and condescending, "I'm assuming you know why we're here." Jason remained silent, unable to find the right words to explain himself. He had been so focused on the promotion, on the chance to prove himself, that now he couldn't even speak. "You missed the meeting. You had one job today, Jason. One job," Callahan continued, his tone dripping with irritation. "This is unacceptable." Jason opened his mouth, trying to explain, but his voice faltered. "I helped an elderly woman who fell outside. She was hurt and I couldn't just leave her there." Callahan dismissed him with a wave of his hand. "I'm sure you did, but that's not the point, is it? You were told. No one is bigger than the company. You missed the meeting, and that's not something we can overlook." Jason felt the sting of Callahan's words. He had been so focused on doing the right thing, but now it felt like everything he had worked for was being torn down. He had helped a stranger, and in doing so, he had lost everything. "You've worked here for 12 years, Jason," Callahan went on, "but you've shown us nothing today. You're not getting the promotion. You're not even going to keep your job. Effective immediately, you're terminated." Jason's breath caught in his throat. The words seemed to echo in his head, but he couldn't process them. He had worked so hard day after day, and this was how it ended. He had sacrificed so much, put in so many hours, and for what? To be dismissed in an instant. He had helped someone. Wasn't that supposed to count for something? "Pack your things and go, Jason," Callahan said coldly, making it clear that there was no room for debate. "This is a business. We don't have time for mistakes like this." Jason stood there numb. His mind raced, but his body felt heavy, like he was trapped in quicksand. He had lost everything, the promotion, his job, and the future he had dreamed of. All for helping a stranger. The weight of the decision he had made earlier in the day now felt unbearable. He had thought he was doing the right thing, but now it seemed like he had been a fool. As he left the office, Jason could hear the whispers and chuckles of his coworkers. Their voices were full of mockery, and their judgment cut deeper than any words from Callahan. "You really screwed up, Bennett," one of them sneered. "You threw away your career for some old lady." "Yeah, that was smart," another coworker added, shaking his head. "You really think they care about some stranger?" Jason's heart ached as he walked past them. The mockery, the cold indifference, it all hit him harder than he expected. These were the same people he had worked alongside for years, people who had watched him put in the hours, who knew the sacrifices he had made. But now they saw him as nothing more than a failure, someone who had lost everything because of one misguided decision. Jason reached the exit and he stopped for a moment, looking around the warehouse one last time. This had been his world for 12 years. It was all he had known, all he had worked for. But now it was over. He had given everything for a chance at something better, and now it was gone. Was this really all he was worth? Was he just another man in the warehouse, discarded without a second thought? He stepped outside, the cold wind hitting his face. The rain had lightened, but it still felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on him. Jason pulled his jacket tighter around him, trying to shield himself from the chill, but it was no use. The chill in his chest was far colder than anything the weather could throw at him. His heart pounded in his chest as the reality of what had just happened sank in. He had made a choice, and now he had to live with it. But was this the right choice? Was this what he deserved for doing the right thing? He had been loyal, worked hard, never complained, and yet here he was, out of a job, humiliated and unsure of what to do next. As Jason walked away from the building, the weight of his decision hung over him. He had tried to do the right thing, but in the end, it hadn't mattered. It didn't matter that he had helped someone. It didn't matter that he had put someone else's well-being first. All that mattered was the promotion, the company's goals, and his failure to meet them. Jason couldn't help but wonder, after all these years of hard work and dedication, was there ever really a place for him at this company? Jason's steps felt heavier than ever as he made his way to Mr. Richmond's office. The hallway, usually filled with the sound of bustling workers, seemed eerily quiet now, like everything had stopped in time. He couldn't escape the gnawing feeling in his stomach, the sinking, awful realization that his career was crumbling before his eyes. He had never thought it would end like this, not after 12 years of dedication, not after everything he had done for this company. When Jason knocked and entered the office, Mr. Richmond barely looked up from his desk. The older man's expression was cold, his usual air of superiority ever present as he continued to shuffle papers, as if Jason's presence didn't even warrant his full attention. Jason stood in the doorway, unsure whether to speak or wait for Richmond to address him. The silence between them was thick with tension, and Jason could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him. Richmond finally looked up, his eyes narrowing as they settled on Jason. "Well, Bennett," he began, his voice flat and matter-of-fact, "I'm sure you know why you're here." Jason nodded, trying to steady himself, but the lump in his throat made it hard to speak. He had worked for 12 years at this company, and now it all seemed to be coming to a crushing halt because of one decision. He had tried to do the right thing, but the more he thought about it, the more he wondered if that even mattered to Richmond and the rest of the corporate team. "Let me make it clear," Richmond continued, his tone like ice. "You missed the meeting. Your absence today has shown me exactly where your priorities lie, and unfortunately, Jason, this—" He paused for emphasis, looking at Jason as if the words came with finality. "This is not the behavior we expect from someone in line for a promotion." Jason's stomach twisted as the words hit him. I helped an elderly woman who had fallen outside," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "She was hurt and no one else was helping her." Richmond's face barely shifted, his expression unchanged. "I don't care," he said flatly. "You should have known better. There's a time and place for that kind of thing, but today was about your career. The company gave you a chance and you blew it. It's not about being a good Samaritan, it's about responsibility. And clearly, you don't understand that." Jason's chest tightened, the sting of betrayal heavier with each passing second. 12 years of showing up early, working through the most difficult shifts, and yet none of it mattered. It wasn't enough. In one moment, all of it had been erased. He had been loyal, consistent, reliable, and now it all felt like nothing more than a waste. I don't understand," Jason managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. "All these years. And this is how it ends." Richmond's gaze didn't soften. "You missed your shot, that's how it ends. And if you're asking for sympathy, you're in the wrong place. Pack your things and leave, you're done here." Jason stood there, frozen for a moment. The words hung in the air like a dense fog, suffocating him. The shock was almost too much to process. He had spent over a decade in this company, given everything he had to it, and now he was being dismissed just like that, as if his years of hard work meant nothing. The promotion he had worked for, the respect he had hoped to earn, all of it was gone in an instant. "Now," Richmond said again, snapping Jason out of his thoughts, "leave. Don't make this harder than it already is." Jason's hands trembled as he turned to walk out, his mind racing. He couldn't believe it. How could this happen? How could everything he had worked for be tossed aside without a second thought? He had given them everything, his time, his effort, his loyalty. And yet, it wasn't enough. The weight of Richmond's words felt like a crushing blow, the kind of blow that knocked the air from his lungs and left him gasping for any sense of dignity. As Jason left Richmond's office, he felt the eyes of his colleagues on him. They didn't even have to say anything. He could feel their judgment, their mockery, their amusement. He could hear their whispers as he walked by. "Can you believe that?" one of them said, their voice dripping with disdain. "He blew his chance for some old lady. Now look at him." "Yeah, what a joke," another added. "Couldn't even show up to the one thing that mattered. You really think he deserves the promotion?" Jason's face burned with humiliation. His legs felt weak and every step felt heavier than the last. The sting of his colleagues' words cut deeper than he had expected. These were the people he had worked alongside for years, the people who had seen him give everything to this job. And yet, now they saw him as nothing more than a failure. A joke. He could feel their eyes on him, their silent judgment seeping into his skin. He had expected disappointment from Richmond, but from his colleagues, this was worse. The laughter, the mocking comments, it was like they were all waiting for him to break, waiting for him to show how deeply this had hurt him. But Jason wouldn't give them the satisfaction. He couldn't. He walked through the warehouse one last time, his eyes scanning the familiar rows of boxes, the stacks of inventory, the machines that had been part of his daily life for over a decade. It all felt so surreal now. This had been his world. This was where he had poured his blood, sweat, and tears day after day, and now it was all slipping away from him. Jason could hear the whispers behind him. "Guess that's what happens when you try to be a hero," one of them snickered. "Maybe next time he'll think twice before trying to play the good guy." Jason kept walking, his head down, refusing to let them see the hurt in his eyes. He had made his choice. It wasn't the choice everyone else would have made, but it was his, and he had no regrets. But as he stepped out of the building and into the cold air, Jason felt a wave of despair wash over him. He had done the right thing, but now he had lost everything. He had been loyal to this company, worked harder than most of his co-workers, and for what? To be discarded so easily, to be humiliated in front of his peers. For the first time in 12 years, Jason wondered if he had ever really belonged here at all. Jason stood by his window, staring out at the rain-soaked streets of Chicago. The weight of the day still hung heavily on his shoulders, a constant reminder of how quickly everything could unravel. He had walked out of Elite Freight Solutions feeling like a shadow of the person he had been just hours before. The cold, crisp air didn't help to ease the bitterness he felt. Every step away from the building, every minute of the walk home, seemed to hammer home the harsh reality. His career, his future, everything he had worked for was gone. And for what? To help someone. To do the right thing. The questions swirled around in his head like a never-ending storm, making his mind race in circles. But the worst part was knowing that no one would ever understand. His colleagues. They saw him as a fool. They couldn't see past their own ambitions and narrow views. Richmond. He had never believed in Jason, not really. Despite everything Jason had done for the company, the dedication, the hard work, the early mornings and late nights, none of it mattered. It all crumbled away in an instant. Jason sat down on the couch in his small apartment, the silence enveloping him. He could still hear the faint hum of the city outside his window, the distant sound of traffic and occasional horns, but it felt like a lifetime ago when he was out there, working towards something better. The reality of his situation was suffocating, like the weight of the world had come crashing down on him. The promotion that he had worked so hard for, gone. His job, gone. All because he made a decision to help someone in need. His phone buzzed, startling him. For a second, Jason didn't want to answer, Who could possibly be calling him now? But something urged him to check the screen. It was an unknown number. Sighing, he answered the call. "Hello. Is this Jason Carter?" the voice on the other end asked, a calm, steady voice that instantly caught his attention. "Yeah, this is Jason," he replied, his voice lacking the usual energy. "Who is this?" "My name is Margaret Carter," the woman said warmly. "I'm the woman you helped earlier today, the one who fell outside the warehouse." Jason's heart skipped a beat. The rain, the ambulance, everything from earlier flooded his mind. You're the one I helped?" he asked, still in disbelief. "Yes, that's right," Margaret said, her voice soothing. "I wanted to thank you for your kindness today. You didn't have to stop and help me, but you did, and it meant a lot to me." Jason let out a slow breath, the memory of her lying on the ground, trembling and in pain, returning with full force. "I'm just glad you're okay," he said softly, not knowing what else to say. Margaret paused for a moment, then continued, "Jason, I want to offer you something. I know that today has been difficult for you. Losing your job, your promotion, all of that. It's a lot to handle. And I know you're probably wondering if it was worth it to make that choice, to help a stranger instead of focusing on your career. I'm here to tell you that it was." Jason sat up straighter, the sudden seriousness in her tone piquing his curiosity. "What do you mean?" he asked, not quite sure where this conversation was headed. "Let me explain," Margaret said, her voice soft but filled with confidence. "I'm connected to Carter Global Enterprises, the company you might have heard of. It's a large organization, very influential in various sectors, including community outreach programs. I run a special program that focuses on helping hardworking individuals who have been overlooked or undervalued in their careers. People like you, Jason. People who show compassion, integrity, and dedication but might not have had the right opportunities. I've seen how hard you've worked, and I want to help you change your life." Jason couldn't believe what he was hearing. Was this real? Was it possible that after everything that had happened today, anything, could come from it? He ran a hand through his hair, trying to digest what she had just said. "I don't understand," he said slowly. "You're offering me a job." "Not just a job, Jason," Margaret replied, her voice full of warmth. "I'm offering you a chance to be part of something bigger, a chance to finally be recognized for your potential. We have a position in our community outreach program that I believe would be perfect for you. You've spent so much of your life working hard for others, and now it's time for you to have someone who sees that hard work, who believes in you. I believe in you." Jason's heart raced as he listened to her words. It sounded too good to be true, and yet something about Margaret's voice made him believe her. "But I don't understand," he said, trying to make sense of it all. "I lost my job today. How could I possibly be a fit for a program like that?" Margaret chuckled softly, as if she had anticipated his response. "You're exactly the kind of person we need. You've shown your character today, Jason. You chose to help someone even though it meant losing your promotion. You have the heart, the drive, and the integrity we're looking for. The program I run is designed to help people like you, people who might not have had the best break, but who deserve a second chance. You've earned it." Jason sat there in silence, overwhelmed by the kindness and opportunity that seemed to be pouring through the phone. It felt like a dream, but the sincerity in Margaret's voice told him it was real. A chance. A real chance to start over, to change his life. He had never imagined that a simple act of kindness would open a door like this for him. He had helped someone because it was the right thing to do, and now it was leading him to something he never thought possible. "You really mean it?" he asked, a note of disbelief still in his voice. "I do," Margaret replied without hesitation. "I'm offering you a fresh start, Jason. All you have to do is say yes." Jason paused, his mind racing. Everything he had lost, the promotion, his job, felt so insignificant now, so small compared to what was being offered to him. This was the break he had needed, the chance to prove that his worth wasn't tied to a single job or a single mistake. He had a chance to do something bigger, something meaningful, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. "Yes," Jason said, his voice steady now. "Yes, I'll do it." Margaret smiled, her tone filled with warmth. "I'm so glad to hear that, Jason. We'll get everything set up for you. I promise, this is just the beginning of something great." Jason hung up the phone, his heart lighter than it had been all day. A spark of hope had been lit in him, a spark he hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe, just maybe, today wasn't the end of his story. Maybe it was just the beginning. Jason sat in the back of a sleek black car, the city of Chicago blurring past his window. The ride felt surreal, like he was stepping into a completely different world, a world he had only dreamed of but never thought would be his. The streets outside were lined with towering office buildings and pristine storefronts, a stark contrast to the rundown neighborhood where he had spent most of his life. The car's smooth, quiet ride was nothing like the long bus rides or the cramped spaces of the warehouse he had spent years working in. Jason ran his fingers along the smooth leather of the seat, trying to absorb it all. This wasn't just another job. This was the beginning of something that could change everything. The car pulled up to a towering glass building, its sleek design reflecting the clouds in the sky. As Jason stepped out, the building loomed above him, its imposing height making him feel like a small speck. But today, he wasn't just a worker anymore. He wasn't just someone who had been overlooked or dismissed. He was someone with a chance, a real chance to prove his worth. Inside, the lobby was bright and polished, a far cry from the dimly lit warehouse he had worked in for so long. The floors were gleaming, the walls adorned with modern art, and the air was thick with the faint scent of expensive coffee and fresh flowers. Jason's shoes clicked against the marble floor as he made his way to the elevator, his heart racing with anticipation. As he stepped into the elevator, Jason felt a moment of clarity. This wasn't just about a job. This was his opportunity to do something that mattered, to make a difference in the lives of people who, like him, had been overlooked, underestimated, and discarded. He wasn't just going to work for a paycheck anymore. He was going to lead, to guide others who had been treated unfairly by the system, just as he had been. The elevator doors opened, and Jason was greeted by a smiling receptionist who guided him to a conference room where he was introduced to a group of people from Carter Global Enterprises. Margaret Carter, the woman he had helped months ago, was standing at the head of the table. Her warm smile reassured Jason as she motioned for him to sit. "I'm so glad you could make it, Jason," she said, her voice genuine and welcoming. "We've been waiting for someone like you to lead this initiative." Jason smiled back, feeling a sense of pride he hadn't felt in years. "I'm excited for this opportunity. Thank you for believing in me." Margaret nodded, her eyes glinting with understanding. "You've earned it, Jason. You've already shown us the kind of person you are. You've proven that you're willing to put others first, even when it costs you. That's the kind of leadership we need for this program." Jason's heart swelled with emotion. This wasn't just about getting a new job. This was about the chance to lead a community outreach program designed to help people who had been underappreciated, overlooked, and disregarded. The program aimed to give people like him, like his former co-workers at the warehouse, a second chance, a chance to rise above their circumstances and create a better life for themselves. The team at Carter Global Enterprises didn't just offer Jason a role. They offered him something far more significant. They offered him the opportunity to make a real, lasting impact. They also offered him a salary 3 times higher than what he had made at the warehouse. The pay alone was overwhelming, but what made the offer even sweeter was the health care benefits for his mother, something he had desperately needed but never been able to afford. For the first time in his life, Jason didn't have to worry about his mother's medical bills. He didn't have to choose between paying for her treatment and keeping a roof over their heads. Jason felt the weight of the relief settle in his chest. This was what he had worked for, not the job, not the promotion, but the security to care for his mother, the peace of mind that came with knowing she would have the medical care she needed. As he looked around the room, Jason realized that this was more than just a career change. This was a chance for him to make a real difference in the lives of others. The program wasn't about just handing out jobs. It was about giving people the tools they needed to build better lives, just like he was doing now. It was about empowerment, about seeing potential where others saw failure, about offering a second chance to those who had been denied it. Jason's mind drifted back to the day he had helped Margaret. At that moment, he had never imagined that his act of kindness would open the door to something like this. It wasn't just about helping one person. By helping Margaret, he had helped himself. He had been given a second chance, just like the people he would now lead. As the meeting continued, Jason felt a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. This wasn't a job. This was a mission. He wasn't just going to lead the program. He was going to change lives. He knew what it felt like to be passed over, to be dismissed, to feel like you didn't belong. And he wasn't going to let anyone else feel that way. Later that day, as Jason sat in his new office, the reality of his situation began to sink in. He was no longer just a warehouse worker. He was no longer the guy who had been fired for doing the right thing. He was the leader of a community outreach program, a person who now had the power to lift others up. Jason's phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from his mother. He smiled as he read it. "I'm so proud of you, Jason. You've worked so hard for this, and I know you're going to do great things." For the first time in a long time, Jason felt like everything was falling into place. The future he had always dreamed of was finally within reach. Jason knew that this was only the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, there always were, but he was ready for them. He had learned that sometimes doing the right thing didn't lead to instant rewards, but in the end it always brought the kind of change that mattered. Real change. The kind that lasts. And for the first time in years, Jason believed that he was finally on the right path.